Today is an exciting day. We're meeting Steve, a train driver. Can you imagine what an amazing job that would be? We have so many questions to ask him.
What inspired you to become a train driver?
Oh, I think, in growing up in the 70s and in the 80s, most people my age had train sets and we all sort of loved that sort of stuff. But my dad was someone who could drive anything, and he drove earth movers and trucks and buses and all sorts of stuff like that. And I've always been fascinated with things that move. And my early training, in fact, was in aviation, where I learned to become a pilot. And I had a great interest in doing that. Went through all of that training, didn't really sort of progress into the career that I wanted, but the fascination with trains was still there, and it took many years. It's quite competitive to get into, so it was a challenge that I wanted to take on, and that's sort of where it started.
How fast can a train go? And I wanted to know because I heard that apparently trains can go 90 or something.
Well, it depends on where you are, and it depends on what sort of train you drive. So here in the Melbourne metropolitan area, depending on where you are, so out in this part of the world where we're recording, your maximum speed's about 115 for suburban trains. Sort of the closer you get into the city, the speed limits sort of drop back to about 80 and 60 and closer, and the closer you get into the city, the slower the speed limits become, and that's because there's more trains around and the signals are a lot closer together, so they put that in. But at V-Line, out in the regional areas, many areas are 130, and in some areas, in fact, we can do 160.
When you learn to the train, what do you learn?
So when did I first learn to drive trains? Well, that was back in 2004. Yeah, that was back with the company that was then Connex, was the company that ran it then, and that's gone on to become Metro. So 2004 was when I started to learn to drive trains, and I qualified the following year in 2005. And the reason I really wanted to learn it was because it's a real challenge. It's a long course to learn how to drive trains. I'd been fascinated with that sort of process from when I'd learned to fly, because that was quite an involved process. The way we teach train drivers, of course, is in some ways quite similar. So I was already interested in it from that standpoint. It was just a really big amount of knowledge and skill to learn to take on, and I really enjoyed that challenge, and that's what attracted me to it.
Was it tricky in the terrain?
Well, it can be, particularly when it's raining, because the tracks get really wet, and of course the wheels are metal and the tracks are metal, and sometimes it gets a bit slippery, so it can be tricky sometimes like that. And sometimes when we go out into the country too, there's a lot of, particularly if there's a lot of gum trees around, because they leak eucalyptus oil all over the track and they make it really slippery. So the modern trains now, they're pretty easy to drive. They're made to be easy to drive, so yeah, it's maybe not as tricky as it used to be.
What that may easily got up to got train driver?
I think probably the most challenging part of being a train driver is really just making sure that everything you do is safe all the time. So whether it's making sure that the train's at the right speed, or that you've got enough braking distance when you're coming into a station. So the challenge is always about making sure that everything we do is safe. So even though we would call that a challenge, that's what we teach train drivers to do, is to operate safely. So yeah, while it's a challenge, that's what we do, and that's what we teach when we're teaching people to do the job professionally.
What happens if someone accidentally presses the emergency button?
Well, yeah, that does happen sometimes, and it depends on what train you're in. If you're on a metro train, what happens is it sends an alarm through to the driver, to the driver's cab, and the driver can actually see you on their little screen in the cab. They can talk to you, and you'd be surprised how many times people accidentally, sometimes people just lean up against it, like if the train's really full of people, like on a football train or something like that. So normally what the driver will do on a metro train is that they can talk to the person through the emergency, and you can decide if it is or not. And if it is an emergency, well, then we've got procedures to deal with that. So we can talk to train control, and if we need an ambulance or we need the police, we can organise that, and they'll meet us at a station. If it happens on a V-Line train, well, we have conductors on our train. So what I would do then is accidentally press the button, I'll get a little alarm in my cab, and then I'll contact my conductor, and my conductor will come and have a talk to you and make sure you're okay. So dead man switch, yeah. So we call that a vigilance control device. And the way that works is that when the train's going along, once the train's moving, it's monitoring the whole time. If you haven't made a control input, we call it, so for example, if you've not touched the brake, or you might not have hit the horn, or you might not have hit the master controller to speed up or slow down the engine. If you haven't made some sort of control input like that, and depending on how fast the train's going is the quicker this activates, what it will do is it will flash. So the button will start flashing, and you've got 3 or 4 seconds to respond to that. So you can either respond to that by making another control input somewhere else and it'll cancel it or reset it, or push the button. And if after about 3 or 4 seconds you don't push the button, it'll give you like an alarm. And if you don't respond to that, then it makes an emergency brake and stops the train.
Do freight trains have the trains use the same line?
Yes and no. In some areas they do, and some areas they don't. So it really just depends on what part of the state that you're in. If you're in and around Melbourne, sometimes you'll see freight trains running around in the suburban lines, but generally what they like to do is keep them separated, because freight trains go really slow and they get in the way of passenger trains and slow people down and make everybody grumpy.
Have you got 3 types of brakes?
Yeah, so different trains have different types of brake systems. Your basic brake that most trains have is called an air brake. Some metro trains in fact still have air brakes, although that's kind of old hat now, but all the locomotives use that system. Then you'll have other brakes which are called a dynamic brake. So what they are using is the train's inertia against itself. So if it's an electric train, they can take the power that's being generated by the wheels spinning and they'll run it back through some resistors, and that helps to slow the train down. Diesel trains kind of work the same sort of way. Some trains have what they call an electro-pneumatic brake, which is kind of a mix of both. So it's a brake that puts air into a brake cylinder, just like you'd see on a truck or a bus.
Does your train have a sandbox?
Yep, so all of the V-line trains in particular, and some of the metro trains too, they carry sanders on them, a sandbox. And the reason we use that is to get a bit of grip on the rail. So we can either use it while we're braking if it's wet, or if the track's really slippery with leaf litter or whatever. Also when we're powering away, because the worst thing that can happen is you get wheel spinning, so we call that wheel slide. What you can do is put a little bit of sand on the track, and it's just enough to give the wheels a bit of grip. So it's very important when you're powering away, but it's even more important when you're trying to stop in the wet.
What are the sleeping schedules of a train driver?
Fatigue management is really critical in our industry. Obviously trains are really heavy. A metro train, for example, weighs around 300 tonnes, so you want to make sure that you're really with it and you're really well rested when you're driving a train like that. And of course freight trains can weigh many thousands of tonnes, so maintaining a good sleep schedule is important, and we're very highly regulated on that. So we must have 11 hours in between our shifts, and that's all worked out on, there's a fair bit of science behind why that's important. We don't ever allow that to be breached. So here in Victoria it's 11 hours between shifts, and we really encourage drivers to manage their fatigue. So if you're not well, if you've got things that are affecting your alertness or anything like that, then we always encourage drivers to let us know that, and we can potentially take them off or give them something else to do, and that's all to make things as safe as possible.
Do you help with the ramp with people who have accessibility issues?
So it works a little bit differently between the way we do it at V-Line and the way they do it at Metro. In Metro, you're the driver, you're the only crew on the train. So we encourage people who need that sort of access to wait at the front of the train, and the driver will come out and put the ramp out for you if you need it, if and when you need it. And all trains carry these ramps, so we can do it. On V-Line trains, we have a crew on board, so we have conductors on board, so they take care of that for us. So the driver won't do it, but there's a conductor on board that always does it.
How can we best ensure to catch our train on time?
Well, it's all about being organised, isn't it? But I think, there's plenty of things you can do. You can either download the timetable on your computer, you can even have an app on your phone these days. You can use the PTV Journey Planner, and you can. So there's all those sort of tools available to you. But I think the point is too, particularly in the metropolitan area, if you're catching a metro train, they run really often these days. So if you don't catch the train that you wanted to catch, it won't be long till the next one. If you're running for your train, we see this happen a lot where people run for their train, they do all sorts of silly things and take all sorts of risks and try to pull the doors open while the train's pulling away. That's really dangerous. So there's no need to do that. Let the train go. And don't worry about it, like there'll be another train in 5 minutes. And even on V-Line these days, they don't run quite as often, but there'll always be another train, and it's not worth taking any risks if you miss your train.
Did you have to do much training to become a V-Line driver? And is there much difference between Metro, V-Line, Freight, all of the above?
Training, yeah, sort of. It's kind of similar at its heart, because it doesn't really matter where you start. The sort of basics of it are all the same. So before we ever let anybody into a train to drive it, we have to teach them a huge rule book, about all the rules and regulations around, operating trains safely. And of course, we have to teach drivers signalling and how the signalling system works and all the rules that go around that, and also what to do when things go wrong. So there's a lot of theory that goes behind it. So that usually takes 2 or 3 months. Then there's the in-field component where we will take drivers out and teach them. So generally speaking, no matter which side of the operation you go to, it takes 12 to 18 months normally to get a driver qualified.
If that was the last question, I would like to thank you for coming in today on behalf of Hellow Media. We really enjoyed learning about all trains and what you do.
My pleasure, it's great to be here.
Thank you, Steve, for your time today. We learned so much.